institute and you think about how we connect, enter, progress, and succeed, the ways that students progress through our institution, you think about how they connect, that students can students easily shop and select career paths? Can they enter and quickly onboard with a clear plan all the way through completion? As they're progressing, are students efficiently gaining skills and work-related experiences? And then as they succeed, are they completing credentials then that have value in the labor market? Is it leading to a job that has good pay? And so as you think about this model, I want to show you another way to look at our pathways model. So there's been a lot of conversation amongst our CEOs, and as we're preparing for the legislative session and our work ahead in this academic year, around getting Texans to work with a true pathway. And TRUE stands for Texas Reskilling and Upskilling Through Education. And so your CEOs have had several conversations with legislators and business leaders around the state, and thinking about how we can really reach out to people in our communities that need us the most right now. So there were, at one point in the past months, we had over 3 million people in our communities who were filing for unemployment. And these people needed to get back to work with good pay, and back on a plan for their further education. And so I just show you this emblem as we kick off this institute, because you're going to be seeing this visual a lot. But when you see it, I want you to think this is another way of looking at our pathways model, that we're reaching students and we're helping them get to their goals, which is a good career. So that's my opening context for this institute. I'm really looking forward to this new way of interacting with each other and chatting and discussion boards. So I invite you to be fully engaged in this new way of learning from each other. And with that, I'm going to turn to Dr. Brenda Hellier, who's the Chancellor of San Jacinto College and also the Chair of TAC, to give a word of welcome.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'm truly honored to be here today with all of you. I do wish it was in person also, but I guess that's not what 2020 is going to be about, right? We're all about Zoom. And so as Cynthia mentioned, I am the Chancellor of San Jacinto College, and I'm also finishing up or starting my second year as the Chair of the Texas Association of Community Colleges. And I'm truly honored to serve in these roles. I see every day, just as you do, how lives are being changed by the work that we do at our community colleges. Prior to COVID, I also knew that every day that San Jacinto College was coordinating and engaging the efforts across our community with a variety of different partners, from school districts, businesses, industries, universities, nonprofits, chambers, and our economic development groups. We were part of the fabric and the strength of our community and our students. We had a lot of success stories, and that things were progressing very well. We knew our strengths, and we knew what areas we had to improve on. Overall, times were good. Since last March, when we went into this COVID situation, I've thought about the famous Charles Dickens line from The Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Right now, I can't say that it's either the best or the worst, but honestly, I can say that we're living in challenging times, and they're times that we've not experienced before. We're waiting in line for COVID tests, and we're waiting for results from COVID tests. And in reality, this pandemic is testing our communities, our schools, our families, our businesses, our industries, our government bodies, our economy, our students, everyone. We, as a community colleges serving the state of Texas, are no different. We are being tested in all areas of our operations. We want some sign of past normalcy, and most of us aren't sure what normal means now or in the future. There are days that I tell myself to suck it up and figure out the next steps on this COVID path and our altered operations plan. There are days when I'm tired and frustrated with the pandemic altered operations mode. I wonder if I'm tired and frustrated, then just how tired and frustrated are our students. I know they're facing a lot more challenges than I am. And so while I'm truly honored to serve as the Chancellor of San Jacinto College, I've never felt more of a responsibility for our students, our employees, and our community than I do right now. Every day I ask myself a multitude of questions. I ask how to create a safe environment for our employees and students. I ask myself, how are we going to create the best learning experience for our students that we possibly can? How are we going to support our students so that they can continue and complete their credentials? And how are we going to prepare those students for the workplace when in reality, the jobs in the workplace are struggling and changing? I also ask how we're going to ensure that we're preparing students for transfer to universities so they're just as successful after transfer now as they were prior to pre-COVID times. I know each of you are probably asking yourselves these same questions. And I can tell you that while none of us have all the answers, I do believe your participation in this Texas Pathways Institute is more important now than ever before. Our community colleges are the engine of our communities in Texas. Community colleges enroll more than 740,000 students across Texas. That's 47% of the students in higher education in our state. The majority of those students are represented by the 46 community colleges that are participating in this Zoom Institute today. Even in light of this challenging time, each of your institutions are committed to the Texas Pathways work. And I truly thank you for that commitment. In a situation like what we're in, it might be easy just to try to deal with the daily items right now. And I know they're significant, but not the 400 of you who are participating in this institute. You're committed to looking at new ways of serving our students. You're looking for ways to evolve, improve, and respond. You're looking for ways to challenge your institutions to do more to understand and eliminate the barriers and challenges that your students are facing. This institute is focused on student success and equity through the lens of labor market and transfer outcomes. For San Jacinto College, we've participated in similar institutes previously, once through the AACC Pathways and then through another cohort of the Texas Pathways Institutes. I remember at that first AACC session, our team really didn't think we would find any gaps and challenges in our data. I mean, come on, we were achieving the dream college. We were a leader college. Surely we had touched all the different areas that needed improving, but we did find gaps, and we did find areas that we had to dig into, and we found areas that made us question, why were we offering this credential? We also found areas that made us question how we were advising our students, and we found equity gaps that caused us to question some of our practices. As you participate in this institute, I encourage each one of you to dig more deeply into the data and ask questions. Ask, what is this telling us? Ask, what other information do we need? Ask, how must we change ourselves to make students more successful? And at the end of this institute, commit to several action steps and hold yourselves accountable. At San Jacinto College, we know that the Pathways work and our student success agenda are constantly evolving. We know that this is not something we'll be able to say that we're done with and that we can check a box as done, but rather this work is iterative. There is just the next phase, and we'll continue to identify the next phase after that. With each piece of data that we dig into, and with the next round of questions, we see more that can be done to support our students and their successes. To the SanJack team, thanks for participating in this institute. I promise no emails to any of you during these hours when you're in the institute, and I'm anxious to get your feedback on what you discover as you participate in this institute. I want to thank Cynthia Farrell and the team at the Texas Success Center. They've done an outstanding job of leading the work at the state level. Through Cynthia's leadership and Jacob Frieries from TAC, the Texas Success Center has obtained tremendous philanthropic support, which has enabled all Texas community colleges to participate in the Texas Pathways work. This work is designed to create systemic transformation from entry to success in good careers and further education. This work is about socioeconomic mobility for all Texans across Texas. And we all know right now, this work is never more important than it ever has been before. I want to thank Cynthia and the team at the Texas Success Center for their leadership. I also want to thank the Aspen Institute for being a valued partner with the Texas Success Center, and specifically this Pathways Institute. The Aspen Institute is committed to improving education by developing and informing educational leaders across policy and practice. In a few minutes, Josh Wyner with Aspen will make a compelling case for why we, us, as community colleges, have to do better in our focus on equitable student success outcomes. You'll learn how each of our institutions must use labor market data and transfer outcomes data as essential components of our Texas Pathways work. If we don't, our students and our communities will lose, especially those of color and low income. Josh Wyner and the Aspen Institute team, I just want to thank you for your partnership with Texas Community Colleges. You challenge us and you make it where we can avoid the imperative to do better to serve our students. And to my fellow community college students, as I close today, I want you throughout this Texas Pathways Institute to focus on equity, hope, and urgency. Those are the three big focus areas. From each session, make yourself a note about each one of them. Make a note about equity, make a note about hope, and a note about urgency. I think you'll definitely see the power of why this work is so important. And again, I'm honored to be the Chancellor Sanjak. I'm honored to be the chair of the Texas Association of Community Colleges, and I'm honored to be your peer. So thank you and have a great institute.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hellier. Very valuable welcome. And so with that, then I'd like to introduce Gretchen Schmidt. So Gretchen has been a good friend to Texas, and it was instrumental in us getting our Success Center on its feet. She also led the National AACC Pathways Project that helped us then in turn have our Texas Pathways work. And so with that, I invite Gretchen Schmidt to come and introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you, Brenda. That was heartening in a time where we can always all use a little hope is wherever we can find it. And so thank you, Brenda. I am very happy to be here today and also very happy to be serving as a coach as part of the next iteration of the Texas Guided Pathways Project. And so I have been a longtime friend of the Texas Success Center, and I am thrilled to see the evolution of the work and the expansion of the work across the number of institutions that the center is serving in this important effort. But my role right now is to introduce my dear friend and longtime colleague, Josh Wyner. Josh is the founder and the executive director of the College Excellence Program at Aspen and a vice president there. But I know Josh from many meetings, many times, many venues of just thought leadership, of bringing partners together to have conversations, not just about excellence in community colleges and post-secondary education, but about equity in outcomes for students, particularly post-secondary, post-graduation success for students, whether it's through a transfer pathway or direct into the workforce. Josh and his team are most known for awarding the Aspen Prize every other year to the college or colleges that excel in service to our students, but their breadth of work is so much wider. It is their Leadership Fellows program, and it is also the translation of a great deal of research, particularly lately in the last few years around transfer in workforce credentials, but just in the last few weeks around dual enrollment success for students, taking that research and translating it into practice for colleges to take and use as the basis of their reform work. There is no more generous partner in student success work than the Aspen Institute. And it is with that, I'd like to turn it over to my dear friend and colleague, Josh Wyner.
Thank you, Gretchen. And that was really lovely, and really appreciate those words. And Brenda, thank you for your leadership. I think you exhibit the kind of continuous improvement, dedication to continuous improvement on behalf of students that brings us all here together. It's great to see all of you, or those that I can, on the side of my screen here today. And I too, I'm sorry not to be back in Texas. I've spent more time in the Lone Star State than I have probably anywhere else in the country other than my home, maybe more than my home, and come to really appreciate the many delightful communities you have in the state. And more to the point, the exceptional work that you're doing as colleges. You know, for the first time ever this year in the Aspen Prize process, we have 4 colleges from a single state that have made it to the 10 finalists. And while I can't tell you who else was close, there were many others that were really well respected among the selection committee and thought of very highly. And that's really a testament to your work. The fact that each of you understands that you are the conduit from the talent that exists in so many communities throughout the state and the needs of employers, the opportunities that exist in the labor market, and that closing equity gaps will depend on your work. And it is thanks to Cynthia and Jacob and the work, and Christy and the work that they've helped organize, but it's really your work that has enabled that to happen. So I just want to open by saying congratulations for the recognition that we're seeing in the state of Texas, and more importantly, for what that means for student success. Before getting started, I did want to thank Ascendium, who has made a contribution to enable some of the curriculum for this to be developed. The workforce playbook, which sits behind some of what you're going to see, was funded by Ascendium, and they funded Jobs for the Future, our partner in selecting 3 states for testing the curriculum, as well as a national symposium that will happen next summer. So many thanks to all of our partners who have helped make this happen. So I want to get started now. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about just a reminder of why it matters so much that our pathways are aligned to what comes next for students. I want to talk a little bit about the kinds of credentials we develop and how those get connected to what comes next to the workforce. 3 kinds of credentials in particular: these short-term credentials that Cynthia was talking about earlier, the CTE credentials in high-value CTE programs, and transfer. That fundamentally, we've got to focus on those 3 kinds of credentials and think of our pathways work as connecting students to opportunity in addition to credentials themselves. And then finally, we'll share some examples of what that looks like. The takeaways from this, and I'll repeat this later, are really twofold. One, in the examples, you see an assertive push by colleges to connect students early to pathways of value, right? You've got to make sure that your pathways are strong pathways, and then connecting early. It matters for workforce, it matters for your short-term credentials, obviously, and it also matters for transfer. So takeaway 1 is just about the work, about the early connection. And then the second is defining what it means to be a strong credential and keeping your eye on that ball, keeping your eye on equity disparities by race and income level in terms of who gets what credentials, who's on what pathways, and what are the guardrails that you need to put up and the information you need to be looking at to make sure that your pathways are in fact aligned to strong success and that students are on those pathways in equitable numbers by race, ethnicity, and income level. So moving to the next slide, just a reminder of why focus on post-graduation success. Why does it matter for students? our communities, and the nation? Well, first, we know that there are too many adults stranded in low-wage work. When we think about low-wage work, these are people working full-time who are at 200% of the poverty level. And here are the numbers in the state of Texas. This is pre-pandemic. Obviously, these numbers have gone up. But if you look at these disparities in terms of who is in low-wage work and working full-time, and by the way, nationally, that's about $24,000 a year. These are people, again, working full-time at $24,000 a year or less. These are individuals who need to be upskilled. They are looking for an opportunity. We often think about our students as high school graduates, but we also know that older adults, working age adults, are struggling to make ends meet. Moving to the next data slide. These are traditional age students. This is 16 to 24-year-olds. This is a number in poverty by race and ethnicity in the state. And I can't look at these slides. First of all, that half of all of people in the state of Texas are living in poverty, people aged 18 to 24, is astonishing. But then look at the disparities, that it's over 50% for Black and Latinx students. These are not numbers any of us should be comfortable with. But more importantly, moving to the next slide, we can do something about this. You've all seen this slide, but it really begs reminding ourselves why we're in this work. At every level of education, we help students move further and further away from poverty. Each credential people get enable them to move away. The surest way to help people move away is through degrees. And by the way, this is true of people of every race and ethnicity. While there are gaps in terms of what is available for people with bachelor's degrees by race and ethnicity, for people of every race and ethnicity, getting a college credential moves you ahead. You see a similar trend line for Black, Latinx, Indigenous students. Every time you look at these slides, it is the surest way out of poverty. So this is why we do this work, is because we can move people out of low-wage work. We can help move young people out of poverty. But the key is we've got to get them credentialed. What I want to talk about, though, is that it's not just any credential that matters. Moving to the next slide. What we see, this is actually, I know we're seeing a lot of people who are unemployed. I think in this pandemic, more than in prior recessions, we actually see how correlated degree attainment is with being secure in the current job market. This is just in the first month of COVID. My sense is, from talking to Tony Carnevale and others, that this has gotten even wider. The reality is that frontline work, that a lot of frontline workers in terms of unemployment layoffs, and also in terms of wages lost, that for every level, and you all know this, right? I mean, I'm able to work from home with my graduate degree. A lot of people can't work from home. And we've seen with the shutdown of a lot of frontline service, restaurants, bars, we've just seen how economic displacement is absolutely tracked to the level of college attainment and the level of educational attainment people have. So moving to the next slide, I think it's important that we take stock of access. By the way, we all need to make sure that we're doubling down on access right now. You've all seen the numbers. I know some colleges are seeing continued enrollments staying steady or increasing, but overall we've lost up to 10% of students I've seen from the National Student Clearinghouse. And what's most troubling about the enrollment data is that Black students are not coming in the largest numbers. We've lost the largest percentage of Black students. So we should feel good about what we accomplished in enrollment, but we need to double down and make sure we're reaching out through dual enrollment and to displaced adults to make sure that they're coming to our institutions. But I do think that over time, and our hope is that when the recession is over, that we will again see a resurgence, when COVID is over, a resurgence of enrollment. It's really on the backs of community colleges that we've seen dramatically expanded access to higher education. Moving to the next slide, we also see that that expansion of access has been for students of color. And again, this is, just look at the work that's been done by community colleges in terms of particularly Hispanic Latinx enrollment in our country in earlier decades for Black students. This is something we should be proud of and need to hold on to. Of course, we know that access alone is not enough. Moving to the next slide. We've got to make sure that students complete. Why do community colleges matter so much for equity? Half of students of color in our country start at community colleges. 44% of lower income students start at community colleges. These numbers are down somewhat, but it's somewhere in the 9 million students are in community college. We are the future of our country. If we don't close equity gaps will not be closed in degree attainment and post-graduation success. So moving to the next slide, it's really important to note that not every credential leads to strong outcomes. Now, by the way, I know that music appears twice here, and for all of those who are musicians or have degrees in music, know that I come from a family of musicians, and all of them at one point in their lives were teachers, in addition to being performers and sound engineers. The important point to draw from this is that not all associate's degrees are equal in terms of the average pay. This is in Texas, 1 year after graduation. That comes from Mark Schneider's work 6 or 7 years ago. The important point to take from this is not that music performance and music teacher education are things students shouldn't study, but that they better get bachelor's degrees for those to have value. You need a plan to help students connect to a good job. Sometimes that will be through transfer, and sometimes it will be directly out of your associate's degree programs. But these disparities 1 year out are astonishing if you look at them. And ask yourself the question, how many of your students as they enter the college know this? How many students know that if they are pre-sociology or pre-psychology or pre-biology even, that they are going to need to finish their bachelor's degrees to start to see their wages appear more like those on the bottom of this chart than they are on the top of this chart? Moving to the next slide. It's really important to acknowledge that part of connecting students to programs of study is closing equity gaps in which credentials people have access to. I got a preview of some research that CCRC is doing, and I think you may have access to soon, which shows that while students are in community college, Black students actually increase their enrollment in low-wage CTE programs, right? Significantly, triple their enrollment. In other words, they come in saying, I'm not sure what I want to be. I may want to be on a transfer track. I may want to be in a STEM program, and they end up in early childhood or cosmetology or massage therapy. What happens while people are at our colleges is inequitable. It's not just the skills they arrive with, but in fact, what you're seeing here in terms of who gets STEM credentials, which are most likely to be aligned to good jobs, that's happening while students are with us in our colleges. And it's not because we want that to happen, but there are things we can do about it, as we'll show in a moment. We can help more students of color connect to high-value programs and to good transfer opportunities with our front door work. Moving to the next slide. We also know there's a mismatch between employer need and opportunity. And look, this is a very hard slide to show right now because this is pre-pandemic, but COVID will be over one day. And we will go back to a mismatch unless we do something about it now between what employers want and what is available. The number of good jobs for workers with associate's degrees did grow over the last 15 to 25 years or 30 years. It grew by 83%. So there are good jobs available for students with associate's degrees, but it is also true that there are more good jobs available for people with bachelor's degrees. So, you know, I hear this all the time. People want to argue about whether we should prepare students for transfer or directly for the workforce. And when given that choice, my answer is yes. We need to do both, and we need to close equity gaps in both. This is not a choice of high-value CTE and transfer. This is what we do as community colleges. That's part of our strength, is that we do both, and we can do both well, as we'll see in a moment. Moving to the next slide. It's also important to acknowledge, you know, I don't know, Christy and Cynthia, I can see your faces. Has this slide been shown in Texas Pathways before? No. So what this slide shows, and it took me a minute to sort of get it, is that there is a really, really strong correlation between how early students choose their programs of study and whether they get their degrees. And so as we go through the rest of the slides and talk about helping students choose good pathways, making sure our pathways are aligned to good opportunity, know that if we can get that done earlier, it's much more likely that students will increase. It's much more likely that students will get a degree at all. The earlier students make their choices, and then even if they change once, the earlier they change their choice in year two, rather in semester two, if they change their choice, that's fine. But the earlier they get connected to a program of study, the earlier they have certainty, the more likely they are to get degrees. So this notion of early connection matters not just to get students on the right pathway, it also matters for degree connection. Moving to the next slide. So I want to talk about examples of how colleges around the country have enabled students to move into medium to high wage CTE, transfer and attainment of a BA, and high value short-term programs, and to do that with equity in mind, to help Black and Latinx and low-income students do that. These are the three kinds of credentials that students come to us. Every one of the students in every one of these programs wants to make a decent living. It doesn't mean that being a teacher or a welder is less valuable than being a stockbroker or a lawyer in the end. It does mean that all of those folks are earning a family sustaining wage, and that we do graduate people through pathways that actually don't earn those wages. I just want to note, I don't know if any of you have been seeing the data lately about how Black graduates from colleges are twice as likely to be in default on their debt as white graduates of colleges. And ask yourself the question, why is that? Well, part of it may be underlying wealth that they have, but part of it has to do with what programs of study they're in. We can help more Black graduates succeed after they graduate. If you can't repay the debt, that means that your degree isn't delivering the kind of income you need to repay your debt, right? So we can connect more Black students to good opportunity through program choice and monitoring of student success. So let's move to the next slide and talk a little bit about what we saw at Broward College, which has done remarkable work at incredible scale in getting diverse students into nursing and allied health professions. So Broward has very rich early admissions, and they think about not just high school students, but urban leagues, NGOs. They do aggressive outreach for the nursing and allied health programs into places where students of color are. Second, they have students who have picked nursing. They have them pick a general health science pathway. It's a cluster of programs. Many of you have these kinds of meta majors. And they see whether they are interested in associates of science, but even if they are, they make sure that they get a taste of the health science pathway. Every student in the health science pathway, not after they've finished their math prerequisites and A&P, every student has mandatory ASN orientation. The idea is they really want students to understand what it's going to take early for an associates of science in nursing. And then they work with ASN hopefuls to create educational plans and are monitoring them along the way. In the first term, every student is taking a student life skills course. scientific workplace technical certificates, which is a stackable certificate that has freestanding labor market value, is delivered to jumpstart technical skills so that if they don't make their way all the way to the ASN, they've got something there that they can use. And they provide continuous support for students in nursing club tutoring. They're really aggressive at monitoring whether students are doing well and advancing them. They're delivering 1,000 nurses into the field every year. This is not a small program. I don't know of one that's larger. What's astonishing is that through this very intentional effort, 78% of the students in their nursing program are underrepresented. They're mostly Latinx and Black, and 63% are Pell students. This is a remarkable thing. If you think about your nursing pathway, ask whether you're doing these kinds of things. And then think about that for welding, advanced manufacturing, for some of the energy programs, other energy programs that you may have, for IT programs. These are the kinds of practices from pre-admission all the way through continuous support that has shown at Broward College incredible results for students of color. Moving to the next slide. It's not enough to do high-value CTE. These are data from Tony Carnevale from the Georgetown Center for Workforce Education and the Workforce. And what it's showing is really important here, which is that the number of good jobs requiring a bachelor's degree, which is the bottom, the green part, is going to grow between 2017 and 2027 by 10 million. The number of good jobs requiring a high school education is going to come down by 3 million. And that middle one, which is orange, that's associate's degrees, mostly. The point here is that where are good jobs growing most? It's in the green. It's in bachelor's degrees. They're steady at the associate's degree level. They're shrinking for those who have a high school diploma. And so when we think about our pathways and workforce, we've got to think about transfer pathways. That's what this is telling us. And by the way, proportionately, more and more, that's where the good jobs are going to be nationally. Now, a caveat here, every one of your communities is different. For some of them, the orange part is growing, but nationally, where we see the greatest growth, and particularly in urban areas, it's in the green part, it's bachelor's degree. So how do you do that work with your four-year partners? Moving to the next slide, one of the best, actually, let's go ahead through this. I think everybody's seen that not enough students are getting bachelor's degrees here, but I really want to talk about what the solutions are. So Northern Virginia Community College has partnered with George Mason University to create a dual admissions program called Advance. That means when you are admitted to George Mason and Nova, you're admitted at the same time. It is flipping the default. They no longer say, if you graduate with a C+ or a B- average, whatever it is, then when you're admitted, then we're going to take your credits. No. You're admitted to both at the same time. They've created 100 maps for programs that are very clear. What's remarkable about the maps they've created is those maps are aligned to science, health-related, and education programs where the greatest demand is in the Washington metropolitan area. They started by asking, where are the good jobs? And now let's create those pathways. If you also look into those pathways, what you start to see is a very heavy focus on internships, co-curricular developments of workplace competencies. Work-based learning is built in. The best program maps are not just lists of courses, but competencies that students need. And what they've done is they back map from the employer into George Mason and back to Nova, so that students on the pathways are, right from the time they start at Nova, really thinking about career along these pathways. And the minute they choose one, they're connected to George Mason's expectations for their pre-major students, right, which have been really well developed. All of this is enabled because George Mason saw the opportunity for diverse students. And by the way, we all know about the enrollment cliff that's coming. If you haven't looked at Nathan Graw's work, there's an enrollment cliff that's coming. And four-year colleges are nervous about where they're going to get their enrollments. They need diverse enrollment. George Mason looked ahead and saw that. And they partner with Nova and they said, you know what, if we deliver value, for students and for employers, we're going to get the students we need to continue to grow in the future and secure our institution. And we're going to be able to secure our regional economy and investments, big investments from the likes of Northrop Grumman that see this pathway, used to only see the pathway from bachelor's degrees as George Mason. They're investing, Northrop is investing in transfer pathways because they see that the future diverse workforce is going to come through Northern Virginia Community College. This is the kind of partnership you can develop to build equity into your transfer pathways. The last piece of this that I wanted to point out, if we can move to the next slide, is about short-term training. And the best programs we've seen, some of the best programs we've seen nationally are at Valencia College. At Valencia College, you cannot offer a short-term program if it doesn't offer at least $12 an hour wages. That is the rule they have. And Brenda and San Jacinto have developed similar kinds of rules. I know many of you have thought about those kinds of things. What's really astonishing about what they've done, though, is that they are laddering those very quickly into an accelerated skills training program. They have a system. They're actually now, these are dated, they're now over 1,000 low-income adults being trained every year. It was 550 in 2018. They're aiming towards 5,000 low-income adults being trained every year in 6, 12, and 12-week programs. And I mention this not because your program maps necessarily will need to reflect this. These kinds of accelerated training programs often have their own kinds of program maps that are fully integrated. But in fact, if you think about your front door work and helping students, you will have students who come to you and cannot be with you for a full semester or a full year or 2 years towards an associate's degree, and who need, especially now, to be quickly upskilled. And there are models in the country that are mapping these credentials. Every one of these credentials is industry certified. The jobs offer living wages, and short-term training programs are delivered not just on the college campus, but throughout the community. You're going to have a chance to hear from Carolyn McMarrin, who's one of the leaders of that program in another one of our institutes. So I'm not going to go into this in great detail. It's a remarkable thing they've created. And I do want to note that short-term credentials can in fact help people get a foothold in the economy. Moving to the next slide, though, I do want to note that short-term credentials can have positive labor market value. They tend to be in health certificates, and that stackability does not generally happen. So as you're developing these short-term credentials, what Tom Bailey and Clive Belfield of CCRC's research tells us from November 2017, they did a meta-analysis of the stackable credentials in the country, and they found that by and large, students are not following those stacks. They're not taking the next rung on the ladder. So if you really want students to move to the next thing, be really clear-eyed about monitoring whether they're making their way from one area to another. It's not going to happen magically unless you do something differently than you've done in the past. Students may get a short-term credential, and by the way, if that doesn't offer a reasonable wage, the likelihood is they're never going to come back unless we do something differently than we have in the past. That's what the meta-analysis tells us. Again, we've got good models as Valencia's, but we have to be honest about not the design. What we design is not what students are experiencing. I know all of you have created these stackable credentials with the best intentions in mind, that students will stack, but if they don't in fact come back for the next rung on the ladder, then it's just a design. It's not helping students succeed in the long run. Moving to the next slide. I want to note now San Jacinto. So by the way, in addition to being an Aspen Prize finalist, one of the 4 this year, and is this the 3rd time, Brenda, I think, that San Jacinto has been a finalist? When we did a national search to see which colleges were achieving strong labor market outcomes, in addition to graduation and closing equity gaps in graduation, we found San Jacinto emerged from that research project as well and is featured in our workforce playbook. Brenda, I won't embarrass you any further, but to say that among the practices that we discovered in going to San Jack is that you need a strong yes to these 4 questions in order to develop a program. If you're serious about this, it is about making sure that programs are not offered, new programs, unless they offer strong wages with strong demand, and that you're likely to get a job in the region. This is also true in your program review process, right? That you're doing that in program approval, program review, that you're really paying attention to these things. You can see here on the bottom that in program review, Sanjak is asking these questions on career ladders, not just theoretically, but really asking the question, do students move from one credential to another? I talked a little bit about the front end. So let's talk about what you can do. Let's get to brass tacks. The front end, help students make decisions early. That means putting advising at the front door, showing students what pathways honestly will lead to, making sure students have a financial plan to get through them, strong pathways with good advising. If it's a transfer-related pathway, if they're in a field that requires a bachelor's, make sure they have a 4-year plan, right? That you have a 4-year plan, and that they decide by the end of their first year for every student who possibly can what their major is going to be and where they're going to go to a 4-year college, all right? Front door, you got to curate at the front door. You're not deciding for students, but you should be monitoring whether students really have made a choice in that first year, either for a high value CTE program, meaning, you set your wage level, you should have a wage minimum that you set to monitor who's part of those, or that have chosen a major and a transfer destination in that first year. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you need to make sure that you've got guardrails, that you really understand whether students, in fact, are making their way to strong programs. They, in fact, see whether, actually, if we can move to the next slide, I'll end with this one. One more, apologies. You need to look and see, are students in high-value programs? You're all going to get these slides, and you can see how many students are in structured transfer programs and in workforce programs aligned to medium and high-wage jobs. And this is the information that will tell you whether you have students on these pathways. It's not enough just to look at these slides. You need to disaggregate them and ask yourself the question, what does this look like for Black students, Latinx students, low-income students, for women and men, for returning adult students, right? You need to look across the college, not program by program, but across the college, how many of our students are in structured transfer programs and workforce programs that lead to medium and high wages. So if there are two things that you can take from this and do, it is to work on 1, early decision, and number 2, making sure that you're closing equity gaps and advancing for all students participation in high and medium wage workforce programs and structured transfer. Let's go back 2 slides and I'll close with this. I think I'm over time already. Apologies, Cynthia and Christy. What you're going to have an opportunity to do over the course of the coming sessions is really dive into how what we learned through the workforce playbook aligns to your guided pathways work. And very briefly, our workforce playbook found that colleges that achieve high and improving levels of student success, both in graduation and in workforce outcomes, do these 4 things. They advance a vision for talent development and economic mobility. It's not who shows up at your door. It's who are the students I want to serve and what jobs am I connecting them to? You've got a vision for that. Second, you deliver high quality programs with work-based learning that are aligned to regional needs. Third, you're supporting students' career goals, including early decision-making, as we talked about, all the way through post-graduation. And finally, you're responsive to employers. You start in your employer relationships with the question, how can we solve your problems? Not, here's what we have to offer, are you willing to invest in us? How can we solve the employer's challenges and make sure you've got the talent that you need? In each of those cases, you need to focus on equity. The last thing I will say here is a lot of employers really get the need for diversity, and you're going to find common cause with them. But I just read an article about a major employer who is laying off lots of people who they used to provide an educational benefit to. I don't want to name the employer, but it's a major employer in the hospitality industry that was dedicated to giving students an educational benefit alongside their jobs. They just laid off a huge amount of their workforce. And guess what went with that? The students' tuition reimbursement, right? Employers' interests are not always aligned with yours. Let's just be really clear about that. Your job, our job as colleges, is to make sure we connect the students who least likely are to be connected to education and opportunity with that. And that includes Black, Latinx, low-income students, returning adults, displaced adults, those stranded workers I was talking about earlier. They're the ones who are not participating in what was and will be again a robust set of economic opportunities. You will find common cause with employers, but remember, our job is to keep an eye on those who have the least and have participated in the least, and always to ask, what can we do more to enable equity in educational access and outcomes, both while students are in college getting degrees and in post-graduation success? So I look forward to working with you in the remainder of these institutes, and I will turn it now back to Christy.
So we're going to spend just a couple minutes going over the schedule and logistics, what you're going to experience for the rest of the Institute. If I can get the screen to move.
Sorry, Christy, can I just mention one last thing? I apologize. Apologies, it was in my notes. We had been doing, in addition to the work that I mentioned in Virginia, there's some terrific transfer work happening in Texas. And I want to note the Texas Transfer Alliance, which we have been working with the Dana Center on, and a number of the four-year systems, and Cynthia and Christy and Jacob on, to advance transfer in Texas. We've seen some terrific examples of dual enrollment, dual admission kinds of programs there as well. And I just want to thank everybody who's been part of that. It's really, really important work, and there's been great advances over the last couple of years in Texas in that work. And I neglected it to mention that. We've been part of that. I just wanted to thank Brenda. I know that you've been supportive of that work. I know Jacob and Cynthia and Christy, you have as well. And just didn't want to end without noting the focus on transfer in Texas is very strong right now, and really have appreciated that. Apologies for forgetting that earlier. I just wanted to make sure that I acknowledge that and note the excitement on transfer in the state right now.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. And I'll preview that our Institute coming up in the spring will focus on transfer. So we're excited to be able to tie that in. So looking ahead for the rest of the Institute, you know that it is 3 weeks of programming. Every week we'll have a synchronous plenary session, and you will also meet with your coach at a time that you all schedule. And we have asynchronous work, a discussion board with a video in most cases, or a reading, as well as spotlight sessions. So this week's spotlights are from San Jacinto College, and also from our partners at JFF, Jobs for the Future. So you can look ahead and see next week, we're talking about program mix and aligning pathways to good jobs. And then our third week, onboarding and career exploration. So welcome to Canvas. I know a lot of you have been to Canvas, our site so far, so thank you. And many of you are familiar with Canvas based on your experiences at your college. So most of the action is going to take place in the module section of Canvas, which you'll see indicated by arrows. So if you were to click on modules either at the top left or through the quick links at the bottom of the homepage, then you will get to where the bulk of the content is. And each weekly module, or each module will look like this. There are some in there for pre-institute things. So if you want to get more familiar with Pathways, you can find Pathways 101 information. If you'd like to quickly access the materials used for advanced work, then that's included as well. But here's the module for this week. You'll see the top is going to be the plenary presentation that you are currently participating in. And this afternoon, we will upload the recording of the presentation as well as a copy of Josh's slides. There is a discussion board for everyone to engage in about understanding labor market and the population, then the 2 spotlights that I mentioned, as well as the team strategy session number 1 information. You'll find in there a couple copies of the handout. And then we ask you, after you work with your coach on discussing the questions and completing the handout, to upload it. So you'll notice that this is formatted like an assignment, and it is a group assignment. So only one person in your group needs to upload your handout to this assignment. Another part of Canvas that I'd like to point out is that each college has their own group page. You can locate this group page on the left side of your screen, on the left navigation by going to groups, or on the right side underneath your to-do list, you'll see the course groups with your college name. The group page is kind of like a mini Canvas for you all, so you can compose your own announcements, you can start your own discussions on there, and we can also store files there. So on the left navigation, once you're in your group page, you'll see that files is an option. Click on files and you'll see that everyone has 2 files already. So one is that data workbook that was emailed out to your Pathways lead last week, but it is uploaded to your group file so everyone can take a look. And also a copy of your action and assessment plan. So this is a new version of the action plan and your coach is going to talk you through it, but go ahead and take a look at that. If it looks kind of funny, we've had some reports that it looks like it's 59 pages, just download it and it looks normal. So don't get thrown off by the looks. And another feature is the calendar. And I know that some of you had a couple of issues clicking on a link in the calendar, but we have resolved that one. And we also know that in Canvas, we're going to continue to run into a glitch now and then. And so if you find something, then please let us know and we will fix it as soon as possible. So we thank you for your patience and understanding. We've done a lot of preparation for this institute, but with technology, things are going to happen. And so thank you for alerting us to things that you find. Hopefully there won't be more, but we know that it's probably pretty likely. But if you are in a college team, then on your calendar for each week, we are going to put your team meeting on there. So you'll see over on the right of this screen that the meeting for South Texas for this week is posted. If you click on that calendar event under details, there is a link to the Zoom meeting that should take you straight to your team meeting. And if we have the links for your meetings, then we are going to populate the events like that, and you'll see the events for weeks 2 and 3 on your calendars very soon. So we're going to move into breakout rooms for cross-college conversations for the rest of our session today. You're going to be randomly assigned into a session with a facilitator who's either from the Texas Success Center, it could be a Texas Pathways coach, or a member of the Aspen Institute team. You probably won't have 30 minutes. We're going to have a little less time now, but to discuss your reflections on the keynote or your thoughts on questions as you look ahead to the rest of the Institute. And you'll see here a sample of the questions, and those will be posted in the chat for your breakout room. So we invite you to engage in these conversations with folks from across the state, and also invite you to have a great 3-week institute. So we are here to help. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you all for being here and enjoy your conversations.